Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Big Questions with Big John. I'm your host, Big John, and today, as always, we have a very interesting guest, someone I'm looking forward to speaking to, getting to know him a little bit better. So in order to do him justice, I'm going to look down at my notes and make sure I read his bio correctly. So, my guest for this episode of The Big Questions is an American political scientist, author, and professor. He is known for his work on empirical testing of political claims. Something I could get into. He holds a PhD in political science from Southern Illinois University and a JD from the University of Illinois. My guest today is the author of several provocative books, including Hate Crime Hoaxes, How the Left is Selling a Fake Race War, and Taboo, 10 Facts You Can't Talk About, which challenges the mainstream narratives on race and identity. His latest book, available on Amazon.com, is Lies My Liberal Teacher Told Me. Oh man, that's something I want to really get into. Everyone, please welcome my guest and the self-described greatest mind of a generation. You got to love something like that. Dr. Wilfred Reilly. Will, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
Yes. And I like that little bit of professional wrestling sort of showmanship. The greatest mind, self-described. I got that from your Amazon.com write-up. So let's hope you can share some of that with us and educate us. You are a teacher, after all, I assume, at heart. Okay, let's just start at the beginning. What led you to get interested, I assume, or you tell me, were you always interested in how narratives around race and the political structure thereof, how did that become an interest for you? How did you migrate into this particular area of interest?
Well, I can't say I was always hyper interested in politics my entire life. I mean, when I was a kid, to the extent I thought I was going to be anything other than, an astronaut or a cowboy or something like that, I thought that I was going to be a lawyer. And I mean, I actually went to law school. I graduated from Illinois law in 2005. And I mean, at that time I was pretty young, actually. I was 21 when I got out of law school. I was a bit of a boy genius, parvenu type. And the idea of going into the field that I was most interested in was white collar criminal prosecution. And this is sort of the Enron era. And the idea of actually going into that role at that age seemed like it would suck kind of a lot. I mean, you're working 80-hour weeks. And then
Sure.
after 8 or 9 years of that, I mean, you're probably moving into big firm law and you're working 90 to 100-hour weeks and so on down the line. And I'd applied to a few graduate schools, and I was accepted by Southern Illinois University, where I'd gone to undergrad school, which was an extremely fun place. I mean, SIU at the time was, I think, the 10th ranked party school in the country, and I was a fairly popular
Excellent.
guy there. And I just decided to go back and practice my Frisbee skills for a few more years rather than jumping into the kind of like lower upper classes, still a very young guy.
Wait a second. You were an Ultimate player?
No, I mean, just in general. I played it casually, yeah, but I guess that would have
Okay. Fellow Ultimate player. Okay, just had to jump in with that. Okay.
that would have been
Continue.
the start of kind of the disc golf, people really getting into
Yes.
Ultimate, people setting up courses and so on era, yeah.
Right.
But the graduate field that I was accepted into was my undergraduate major of political science. And at that point, I mean, political science taken seriously is the quantitative study of power. So it's actually a fascinating field, like what determines whether societies succeed or fail? What determines which ethnic groups win in intersectional competitions? So it became very interesting to me. And I mean, you have to do pretty well in any, top 100 program just to stay there. You're expected to be around a 4.0. So I focused in graduate school much more than I did in undergraduate school. I was a trash student early on. But, I came out with my interests pretty solidified. You have 3 or 4 major fields. I added on quantitative methods essentially as one as well. I took 4 or 5 advanced classes in that field. And by that point, I was ready to go. I had some pretty set interests. And last thing, but one of them what had become by this point kind of testing a lot of the claims that had become very prevalent in, again, specifically American lower upper class society by this point. Like, we'd seen the start of the woke period a little bit. So people were starting to say a lot of things about the institutionally oppressive, patriarchal nature of society in an attempt to sustain kind of the civil rights fervor of the 1960s that didn't really seem to be true and that seemed to be really testable. So the argument in this period was that there wasn't, people by this point had pretty easily determined that the old bigotry of the past didn't exist anymore. You could just ask people, you're a black guy, do you have any problem with a white Irish girlfriend? No. You're a white guy, do you have any problem with a black Caribbean girlfriend? No. And the rates were 96% no. And a lot of people are just saying, okay, why don't we retire these old conflicts in the past that I didn't see at all in my working class neighborhood and move on to something else? And this created kind of a hysteria in the very left-leaning social sciences. So people were attempting to say, well, no, there are all these subtle things under the surface, like stereotype threat. The reason that minority kids score 150 points worse on the standardized board tests isn't that they're just not studying, which by this point had already been documented. Black kids study about as much as Southern white kids on the same sports teams, which is to say not at all, whereas Asian kids study 3 hours a day. No, that doesn't have anything to do with it. They're just scared when they see the test. That's stereotype threat. There's the idea of racial resentment, which is that there's a series of things like opposition to affirmative action that must, the theoretical framework here is really weak, but that must be linked to racism. So you can create this kind of survey interface measuring racial resentment, and you can correlate that to opposition to liberal policy, so you found hidden racism. And I was looking at this after training for like 4 years as a pretty good quant, and I was just saying, a lot of this is bullshit. And it seems like if someone from one of the state U's or one of the Ivies, like someone who's actually good, started looking at this, it would all come apart. So for my dissertation, I looked at, and by the way, I like the guy who did the original experiment here. I don't think he was trying to prove anything sort of like dark and sinister. But I looked at what's called the Hacker test, where a real New York guy from Queens University now, Andrew Hacker, asked a bunch of people how much they'd have to be paid to become black. And this sounds like a hilarious experiment. This is a guy who's asking a bunch of Irish and Italian guys from Queens, how much would you have to be paid to be black? I would have liked to be in the room. And their black buddies were in the room too, and they were like...
By the way, I probably was in the room in those days. I come from that area myself. Yes, so I'm sorry, go ahead, yeah.
That's absolutely hilarious. I'd be interested in what your figure might be. But so he asked all these guys, like, how much would you have to be paid to be black? They wrote anonymously on notebook paper. And the average answer was $50 million. And so this became just extremely famous as an example of, look at the value working class whites assign to white status. That shows that this is an institutionally, structurally racist country. These white construction worker and cop types know that they're going to benefit throughout their lives from being white. And it struck me that they didn't use a control in this experiment, meaning that they didn't ask any black guys how much they'd have to be paid to become white. They didn't balance this out. So you're not testing whether this just measures kind of almost ignorant pride in your ethnic group as versus some kind of really rational assessment of benefits. So for my dissertation, I actually designed what I think is a pretty good experiment, where by the end I'd asked almost 2,000 people in this anonymous design that's called a list experiment, first assuming this is even possible, to eliminate the people that just thought the question was stupid,
Right.
this were even possible. How much would you have to be paid to transition a series of identities, but your race from, say, white to black or from minority status to white? I threw in your sex from male to female, from female to male, your sexual orientation, etc. And what I found is that everyone was really, really reluctant to do this. It didn't have anything to do with race at all. In fact, if you view reluctance to change your race in a multiracial society as a measure of racism, the most racist group is old Asian men. But the most racist large group would be black people. Whites came along after that. The least racially prejudiced population would probably be Hispanics. I'd have to go back and look through the data. But I mean, so this famous sort of test that was used to determine all these problems in the Caucasian community didn't really mean much of anything. And so that became an interest of mine. Like, could you take these same sort of complex analyses and apply them to stereotype threat, which a lot of people have now done. That's basically been debunked. Racial resentment, implicit bias, and people who are actually methodologically better than me now have done that. That's largely been debunked. Implicit bias turns out, you know what implicit bias tests are, right?
Say that again. The question, I didn't quite catch that.
Yeah, are you familiar with implicit bias testing?
The testing method? No, please go ahead. Let me know what that is.
Yeah, so implicit bias testers, this thing which became very big in business about 10 or 12 years ago. An implicit bias test is another one of these attempts to measure kind of subtle racism. So what an implicit bias test is a test that projects a series of words on a screen, basically, words like happiness, and then often literally a series of, for example, cartoon faces, a white guy and a black guy. And you are asked to associate the face with the word, basically. There are a couple of ways to do this, like right-clicking on the face. And the idea of the test is that if it takes you longer to associate a black face with a happy word than a white face, you're a racist. And,
Gotcha.
I mean, I always thought this was pretty dumb. Like, there might be something there might not be. But the question is, does that actually correlate with anything in real life? Like, are people that are slow face clickers also less likely to hire black dudes at the firehouse or something?
Right.
And you have to actually go out and do like a large end study where you do this. You work with bosses or something to test that. And someone finally did that, and they found out no, there's absolutely no correlation at all. It's just completely meaningless. But I guess the point I'm making is that really became an interest of mine. Like, were these complicated laboratory techniques that people were using to accuse everyone of racism or of quote-unquote objectification of women, which struck me as just normal sexuality. Did this mean anything? And that's still something that I'm trying to do today. I mean, I'm talked for quite a while, but like I have an idea of privilege measurement experiment and so on.
Right. By the way, super interesting stuff. As a background, I'm a data analyst myself by training, but you've triggered a lot of questions in me, especially since I was working in highly competitive, high stress arenas back then at the time. I'm assuming you're referring to the late 80s, maybe early 90s time period. So I have a couple of quick questions for you. First of all, interesting in when you looked at that data, one of the things in my mind that I wondered is, did the age of the participants have any effect on those things, like how much would it take you to, if you're a white guy, how much would you accept to turn black, or vice versa? Because my intuition, and I haven't studied or seen anything to it, is the younger you are, the less that indoctrination into your reluctance to change your identity, even theoretically. The older you got, those barriers might be higher, I would assume, right? So if you asked a 5-year-old white kid, how much would it take for you to look like Dr. J back in my day, I would have paid you to turn me into Dr. J, right? But as you get older, though, now you're used to, hey, I've been raised in a particular culture, I've associated with certain groups of people, and as my partner William loves to say, homophily is really big, right? So the older you get, the more you become to say, I want to stay with people that I identify with, which tends to be my own, in quotes, right? So did you find that age had any relation to these responses? Like the older someone got or the younger someone got, that it may skew the results one direction or the other?
Yeah, it was a really interesting effect. And again, I don't have the entire book in front of me. This actually became a book with a small imprint, Scholars Press, if I recall correctly. People can look it up on Amazon. But, and actually, for anyone that doesn't want to pay for it, this is also just a dissertation hosted on the web service that hosts SIU and U of I. I mean, you can just Google Wilfred Reilly dissertation and find the whole thing. But the effect, basically, it cut in the way that you're describing. So, older people in general were more reluctant to change their race. There was a slight exception in that older black people, I think it was black conservatives, were a bit more likely, like, when you got past a certain age, like 60, some of the minorities began to devalue their race. Which actually, what that implied to me was that there was an era of real racism. Where if you were a Southern black guy who was very patriotic, it might have struck you like, hey, it would be advantageous for me to be white if I want to play this role in society.
Right.
But that emphatically does not occur anymore. There was some interesting stuff. Like, we did the first portion of the paper was just me asking people, hey, would you be willing to change your race or not in this scenario? And if so, for how much money? And again, I would emphasize that like the 50, 60+% majority of people are just, their response was just, no, like I wouldn't do this. And so that was the striking thing. But the people that would do it demanded large amounts of money. I mean, more
Right.
than hackers $50 million. I actually used to joke about this at my like dinner speech and job talk. Like, yeah, the average black guy demanded 80 million, which you have to adjust for inflation. But it was the same thing. It was a figure in the tens of millions. But I did a follow up, which is called the list experiment, which, as you probably know, is a situation where you divide a group of people, say 500, in half, and you ask half of them, how many of these four things would you ever consider doing, in my situation for any amount of money? And the four things would be, losing a limb in a risky adventure. They can be really anything, but one of them
Right.
was changing your core racial or sexual characteristic. Well, actually, no, the four things would just be four things that are at that same level of seriousness. The other half of the population would be asked how many of five things they would do with changing your core racial or sexual characteristics added. So you can see what percentage of people would consider doing the thing that you're asking about in this sort of double anonymized situation, if that makes sense.
Right.
Like, they don't
Right.
even know that you can tell that they're considering this, which of the things has been thrown in as the special vector. And when we did that, when we did the list experiment, I still found that the vast majority of people wouldn't change their race, but there were some interesting changes. So like the population of whites that would not change stayed the same or increased a little bit. So there was very little change with whites. There was also very little change with blacks, but the population that would not change stayed the same or decreased a bit. So like slightly more black people actually would change, but there were still more black people that would not change than there were whites, as I recall. With
Yeah.
Hispanics and with Hispanics and Asians, it was a little different. Like the huge majority still wouldn't change, but it turned out some Hispanics and Asians had been lying. Like there were some Hispanics and Asians that actually would be willing to be white, specifically white, not any other option. And that was just something I thought was interesting. Like of those groups had a little different, a slightly different relationship with race.
Now, let me ask you this. During, as you were talking, you brought to mind Chris Rock, the comedian, and one of his stand-up routines was when he would talk about this, he had a very specific routine that was like, there's racism we don't talk about because I go from city to city and none of you white guys would want to trade places with me. And I'm rich. That was the punchline,
Yeah, I
right?
don't
And
know
I'm
about that.
rich. So in that sort of thing, do you find that perhaps, and again, it's anecdotal with this particular incident that I referred to, was it pop culture feeding the narrative of systemic white racism, hidden white racism, or was it the opposite? Was it that somehow there were these very deliberate attempts to influence pop culture, which then would amplify those narratives into the general population?
Well, I mean, so first of all, in terms of Chris Rock's comment, I love Chris Rock, but I think that's pretty much bullshit. Like, I mean, so first of all, I think just looking at my results, like in any audience, there probably would be 30%, whatever, of the population that just
Right.
would trade places with him. Or, I mean, there were that percentage of the population would trade places
Right.
with a generic individual, at least if you paid them some reasonable amount. Chris Rock these days is worth a few hundred million. I mean, I assume you'd get a larger number of people that were willing to make that jump in his case. But beyond that, the reason that people wouldn't exchange places with Mr. Rock isn't racism. no black people would trade places with the average white guy, and few of them would trade places with a rich white guy. And there actually is a whole interesting body of research here for anyone that wants to sit down at a desk and ask people if they would, use magic crystals to change who they are. I mean, I don't think that the average white guy would exchange places with another white guy. Like, do you lose your fiance and your entire family? So I think that we've gone through a period of people making these performative statements like, no white woman understands black hair, sort of thing. And a lot of them empirically aren't true, and I'd put that in that category. But when you ask which way does the correlation cut, like, is it sort of witty pop culture that's influencing the academy as it moves up and the youth as it moves down, or are these social scientists in the towers really influencing what people think in society? I think the social scientists in the towers really are influencing what people think in society. And I think this is often pretty troubling. So it's awkward to talk about some of this because a lot of the topics you feel kind of odd or creepy if you discuss. But I mean, like, there are a lot of trends socially that are really problematic on the large scale in terms of the effects that they're going to have, and that are very definitely influenced by academic ideas. So, like, if you look at the concept of girl boss feminism in the academy, for example, like, you could have it all queen, the essays with these kind of titles and so on. Like, the average age of marriage for women has moved up until it's almost on par with the average age of marriage for men. Last I looked, it was 32 for men, which is insane, and 29 for women. The problem with this is that peak fertility for humans is 23. So again, you're not going to bring that up at a dinner party, but that is something that comes from a particular theoretical place, i.e., housewifery is pretty bad. A woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle, so on. But that's going to have pretty significant downstream effects. I mean, helping a female friend criticize a paper, yesterday I read a theorist who argued that the ideal age for marriage for a woman is 40. See if you can make vice president and then settle down, and then you can have 2 kids, the paper says. And I'm kind of looking at this like, can you? I mean, that's going to be really dependent on your body. Like, in about 45% of cases, like, I'm a man, but I was a competitive athlete. I'm pretty aware of how the human body works. Like, more than half the time, almost half the time, that's going to have some really damaging physical effects. Like,
it's also damaging in terms of association with unsafe births and births of birth defects, and as especially as women cross 40. So you're absolutely right, and I think we are seeing some of that. To your point, like this association, but you did touch on this as you were pursuing these debunking these myths and researching this data. Did you feel that you were being dissuaded from doing so, or discouraged from doing so by colleagues? And I'll ask you bluntly, was it from colleagues, perhaps your white colleagues or your minority colleagues, who tried to persuade you one way or another not to pursue this track? Like, for example, well-meaning white liberals who might walk up to you and say, like, hey, Will, you may be right, but we need to move the needle to benefit everybody. Sort of like when I would point out that this whole women earn 73 cents for every man for doing the same work, statistically, it's just pure nonsense. I would hear my female colleagues say, we know the numbers tell us that story, John, but, actually we want to get more women in this line of work, so we're going to push that narrative. I've actually run into that, and I've done nowhere near sort of the work that you have. So talk to me a little bit about that. Like, did you find resistance from more from your white colleagues or your minority colleagues? Did you not find any resistance? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, so that's a good question. And by the way, one more thing about like the last point we were talking about. I don't think either of us wants to harp on feminism specifically here. Although I will say your comment there about the 73 cents to the dollar. I have a lot of love for my first and second wave feminists. They got checking accounts and some other things that our businesswoman equals deserve access to. But feminists in general, I've found, use statistics about as dishonestly as any other group in society.
Sure.
like the day the most women are murdered is Super Bowl Sunday, just like crazy stuff. And you check it out and like send a private email like that's not true. The 73 cents to the dollar, I believe that's the one that compares all women to all men, including the 26% of women that are non-working housewives. Like, come on.
Or who've interrupted their careers to start a family because their continuous years of experiences. So they'll look at total experience versus continuous years of experience, which, by the way, applies to a man. If I took 2 years off for whatever reason, I'm not going to continue my career at the point at which I left, right? I kind of regress. So yes, you're absolutely right. It is kind of silly, the whole
I mean, the business guys at PayScale, guys and gals at PayScale, took a look at this a year ago, and they found that if you adjust for everything, like job being done, contiguous experience, so on, the gap is 2 cents on the dollar, which, interestingly enough, does imply that there's some reasonably significant sexism, or at least negotiating skill differences. But there's no, obviously, if you could hire a businesswoman for 70 cents as versus a man for $1, no one would ever hire men. Every trading floor would be populated entirely by aggressive women. People would be stalking field hockey teams. I mean, that's not a real thing.
Ironically enough, that's when the left abandons their greedy capitalist argument because
they're so bigoted they won't try to make money. Yeah,
right. Because as a greedy capitalist, show me all the women who could do the same work if your narrative is correct, who are willing to do it for 28% less than men. Yeah. I would start 20 companies staffed entirely by women because that's how I will maximize my profit. When I bring that up, as I'm sure you have, then it becomes like, well, business owners don't always work in their best interest, so you get nonsense like that, but yes, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but yes, granted on that, yeah.
But I think that these ideas, there's a point here that I think we're both making that's very important. These ideas from kind of what's often dismissed as the ivory tower creep down into society. So, I mean, like, the idea that the United States is a white supremacist patriarchy is something that most people probably view as a joke. You make fun of it with your wife. But if you were a high school senior and you were to Google, is the USA a very racist country? I mean, you'd see me for National Review, and you'd see other people writing empirical articles, some for the Social Science Journal, saying, well, no, not really. We're the fourth least racist country in the world. But that'd be interspersed with no real breakdown of which articles were serious and which weren't, with pieces from Bustle and Jezebel and, The Root and the Griot and so on, saying, yes, of course, and, picturing bloody George Floyd and so on down the line. And your default conclusion would be yes. So, I mean, I think that all that stuff is very influential. Like,
but let me jump in here for a split second. I don't mean to interrupt you, but and I always find this a little interesting because using Google to do that, obviously Google plays an SEO game. It's an algorithmic game. Yeah. It's not qualitative to the sense that I think you would find rigorous, right? Like, yes, it's a data point. I agree, but how would we go about to because like you said, it could be like a Jezebel doesn't care if they're actually valid or not. They're just looking for clicks. They're gaming algorithms to come to the top of the search results for those particular terms, right? How do we like? Have you found that there's still that in the family unit that these are still things that are either are or are not being propagated throughout the family units, like? For example, would someone growing up in what, I don't know what the definition is, but I'll use air quotes, a traditional black family, are traditional black couples teaching their kids, are they having the talk, as we heard former Mayor de Blasio in New York, like, I had to have the talk with my son about how, to be aware of cops and white people on the streets. I had to have that talk. Do you think that's an actual narrative? Is that a political narrative? How do you feel that is? How is that like positioned in society today?
Yeah, I think that as things, so this, I think there's a trickle down effect here. So no, I don't think most black fathers who are iron workers or whatever, postmen, Think of some common truck drivers. Think of some common black or working class white jobs. Are sitting their kids down and telling them to be panicked about the police or something like that. But I don't think that's any more common than it would be in Appalachian or Italian American or any other households where you might be aware of the cops, where there's a fairly high rate of arrest, fair or not. Native American. But I do think that as people constantly hear something, that thing becomes accepted more as potentially true. So, like, to give an example, I had a conversation with actually a feminist friend online about abuse the other day. Now, I don't normally sit around talking with feminist friends about abuse, but, like, where the things we're talking about are actually pretty prevalent. So she said that, I think her line was, sexual coercion is a form of rape. We were talking about, like, couples talking about, like, hey, it's been a while since we slept together. And she followed that with physical beating is a form of abuse in the context of spanking. And I'm a lawyer by background. And so I actually pointed out, like, what sexual coercion means is, like, brutal threats of force. And again, this is one of those awkward topics that I wouldn't, like, bring up at a dinner party. Right. But, like, it doesn't mean, like, honey, if you don't get that porch cleaned off, you're not getting any. Like, that's not what it means. Abuse means, like, bruises that last more than a week, at least under Illinois state law. Now, most people aren't going to push their wife or their kid or their husband near to either of those limits, but they do have meanings. However, if you are some junior intern for the Department of Justice and you write off, and you'll find this on Google, like a one-pager that's just like, no coercion is ever acceptable, no physical abuse is ever acceptable, and you put that online, many, many people will believe what my friendly opponent was saying. So you frequently hear people say stuff like this, like, never touch your kid. And I think as those things become socially prominent, more people believe them. And so you get people doing, weird shit, like calling DCFS if their dad slaps them on the butt twice, or contacting the authorities if their neighbors let their kids walk home. The reality, of course, is that there's no crime in that situation. There's no moral violation in that situation. But you do get an environment where the ideas of these weird, socially awkward academics have a really outsized influence. I think that does happen.
Yes. Well, what was that, like you hear Sowell says this a lot, Hayek said it, it's like the most destructive ideas come out of academics, right? Like out of the ivory towers, it seems like, in society. This is such an interesting topic. I could talk to you for hours, Will, but I do want to give you the opportunity to tell us about your new book, Lies My Liberal Teacher Told Me. So, first of all, before you start, I just want to say, like, definitely this has been something that, as even in my pales in comparison to yours academic career, it was something I was aware of as early as high school. Like, that all my teachers had a leftward bias. I grew up in New York City, so of course I'm surrounded by left-wingers, Democrats, however you would have referred to them in the 70s and 80s, and I was aware of it. But to be honest, I always make this distinction. I always understood that it was their political opinions, their societal opinions that were biased. I never questioned the facts I was taught. So I never once walked away saying they lied to me. Or, I used the New York Times as back in the day, like, say, literally 50 years ago.
Sure.
The New York Times, I used to call them Pravda West. But I never doubted that if they said there were 3 men involved in that crime, that there was actually 3 men and not 4 or 100 or 0, right? So talk to me a little bit about that as you tell me about your book, because how has this migrated from, academics had a leftward-leaning bias, perhaps it was tied into free speech at the time, that this all originated, say, in the 60s with the student movements at Berkeley or whatever. How did we end up here, and how does your book address that?
Yeah, so my book is a response to a whole genre of books that exist out there, and I'd agree with you, by the way, that the media, and to some extent this includes right-wing media too, like, in the first cable news and then social media era, the media has become more explicitly kind of clip chasing and dishonest. I don't really know a media studies scholar that disagrees with that. But in terms of what my book is about, my book is a response to maybe 8 or 9 previous books that have tried to make 2 points about education. The first point is that society is being taught kind of this overly positive, jingoistic narrative about history that's false. So, I mean, like, Lowen in 1995 wrote a book called Lies My Teacher Told Me, arguing that the schools, at least through the 50s and 60s, 70s, were teaching people that there were very few Native American Indians, Columbus was a hero, so on down the line. And that's been followed up by, I mean, like, the 1619 Project wrote a book, 1619. People sometimes pitch that as a black history of the United States. Slavery has been undersold. In reality, the slaves built everything. That's only a slight oversell of what they say. You know, everything unique about the United States of America came out of black slavery. Right. You know, the native version of that would probably be Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, a native history of the United States. There's that old Marxist Howard Zinn, a people's history of the United States, kind of jamming all these narratives together. Right. And the core theme is we always say we're great, in fact we're evil, but there's a second part that I think has received less attention that's more notable, which is this sly little implication, and nobody knows this except you woke, intelligent, upper middle class kids that are being told it. So all these sort of textbooks will have these little sidebars. There's like a red arrow pointing up with a header like the Seneca Falls Declaration, and under it the words will say in agate type, your parents probably don't know very much about liberation, feminism, you know, and right. So the idea is like you are being taught the truth, and the truth is that we're evil and no one's ever been evil like us before. And in response to this, my book says a couple things. First, the West is not uniquely evil. In fact, in context, we're not evil at all. The sins of Western society were the same things that people did through all of history. I mean, conquest was universal for humans who are predators, the species that domesticated wolves. The Geneva Convention saying things that you couldn't rape or torture prisoners of war. The last of those was signed in 1954. The right of conquest, if you won a war, you couldn't just take over the other guy's country, was signed. And I will say Italy, Ethiopia, and China signed pretty reluctantly in 1946. 3 different races there, by the way, for anyone that wants right. to feel guilty about their team. You know, so all of this, what we did, everybody did. Greatest conquerors in history, not whites or blacks. They were Mongols, you know, mounted horsemen from the high plains that conquered India, right. China, Russia, the Middle East, all of that within about 100 years. It killed 11% of the population of the earth, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Yeah. But the greatest warriors in history. But Subutai, the Mongol general, the Tartar whip cracking over Europe, was probably the greatest fighting man who ever lived. But anyway, so the point is the Westerners didn't do anything unique. In fact, they did some unique positive things, like ending slavery. Abolitionism was a Western, specifically Christian practice, which ought to be recognized. Huge role for women, huge role for the church. But I think that's point one, and that's really obvious if you read through my chapters on slavery, if you read through my chapters on native culture. And I specifically honor the natives as warriors, as poets, in religious terms. But I mean, I also make the right. point, like, the Aztecs built a pyramid of human skulls in the center of their capital. Like, we have to be real about what all these peoples were. You can't talk about the lovely Aztec flower poems and the snake statues and so on and not discuss the fact that all that stuff led down to the pyramid of human skulls. And there are a lot of books today that just omit that, and that's crazy. That's just intentional racism against whites or Westerners. Like, you have to be honest about the other side, who the Christians were fighting. So that's point one. Point two, though, is more serious. It's just that not only are the Westerners not uniquely evil, if anything, they were uniquely good historically, it's also not the case that the narrative that the West is bad is some kind of novel, original thing that no one has heard. It's the mainstream narrative in society. The books that I read to put my book together were the textbooks from high school. The 1619 Project was published by the New York Times. Like, there's nothing exotic here. There's nothing unique here. The center left of the Democratic Party runs the country right now. That's Joe Biden, Kamala Harris. So I make this point, and then I say basically, yes, we have a racist history. Yes, in the past, the far right for periods of time has been in control. But for the past 60 years, at least in education and media, the center to the far left has been in control. And we need to ask ourselves, are the things that they have been saying any more true than the things that the right said when we, to some extent, were in charge? And the answer is no, and I break out a couple of them. There were no Russian spies in the USA during the Cold War, and crazy nonsense like that. And I think the book does a pretty good job of doing that.
Yeah, no, a lot of what you're saying does make sense. Again, I remember in the '80s battling with people like, no, Alger Hiss was a spy, and Whittaker Chambers did reveal a lot of what was going on, at the State Department and at Columbia University and other elite universities. But is it a matter of the pendulum swinging both ways, and is it just a matter that now its apex is on the left? Do you think there's a swing back to the right? Is there ever hope of the pendulum just kind of sort of narrowly swinging between the two narratives somewhere closer to the truth? Or do you feel that it's always going to be this swing? Maybe the amplitude, the periods are going to change, but it's still a pendulum, and really that is the way society or nature works. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think that there's a big role here for normal leaders, essentially. I mean, people like me and you, people that have voices. The biologist Colin Wright, who I have a meeting with today, comes to mind on this as well. I mean, just normal people should criticize extremes in either direction.
Right.
So, I mean, I like the guy. I have no beef with him, no hate. But I mean, like Charlie Kirk, who's an opinion leader on the right, came out earlier this summer and said, we really need to criticize this Martin Luther King guy. And I mean, the revelation had dropped King had a mistress or something. But it was like, my reaction was like, come on, Charlie. Like, strategically, that's one of the silliest things I've heard anyone say in a long time. So when people say things that strike you as foolish or illogical, I think it's important for you to say, well, no, that doesn't make sense to me. That's wrong.
Right.
That's incorrect. So I think you can halt the pendulum at any point by saying, well, no, I think what you're saying is morally or logically wrong. I think that's the answer there. There's nothing wrong with just saying, I draw my lines here on the left and here on the right. And I think a lot of people have a problem with this most of us played competitive sports. There might be a teamwork reason. A lot of men in particular,
Right.
soldiers. But there's nothing wrong with just saying, certainly in private, okay, I'm comfortable up to here, but not beyond that. Like, I personally don't have a problem with gay marriage. I have the old locker room attitude toward gay dudes. There are more women for me. But I have a problem with what I consider sexual perversion beyond that. I mean, when you get into the transgender stuff or anything with kids, I'm not for it. Anything with animals, I'm not comparing this to being a loving gay couple. But I mean, I don't see any reason why I should have to explain that. I can say I'm fine with marriage being extended to gay guys. Conservatives can make their own decision about whether or not to go to the wedding. But when you start saying things like, how do you feel about polyamorous couples 2 years below the age of consent, I can just say, well, get the cops. So you don't have to accept all sexual flexibility or something like that because you're tolerant of, X. And I think it's a good rule to extend into every sector of life.
Now, and by the way, I do agree with you. Personally, I'm a libertarian, so the more individual the choice, leave me alone, I'll leave you alone, that sort of thing, non-aggression, that's my whole deal. But I will ask you one thing, though.
Okay.
Why does it seem that the left, liberals, progressives, whatever term is applicable these days, I get confused at times, why such interest in actually pushing these narratives? What is the benefit to the purveyors of these narratives? Like, I don't see university professors necessarily, say, building their wealth with these narratives. Like, they may be securing tenure or something, right? Some of them, I believe, may just be they may be really noble intentions and just screwing the methodology up, screwing the pooch, so to speak. Why would you say these narratives are being so easily adapted and so easily accepted in academia, and I mean by the foot soldiers of academia, the in-classroom teachers, the professors, the educators? Why are they so willing to accept the narrative?
Yeah, well, I don't think these narratives are being pursued for rationally amoral reasons. I think that's part of the problem. Like, rational amorality is actually, I'm certainly Christianity and Stoicism can take you further, but rational amorality is actually a pretty good guidepost to life outside your family. Like, be reasonably honorable, but do things that benefit you. I mean, that was life for almost all of history. The Viking 9 noble virtues to those close to you, and, the open hand, but nothing else outside that. That's not what we're seeing with these people. What we're seeing is zealotry toward a new faith, almost. Why? Okay, so I'll actually give an answer there, though, as opposed to just like doing my prey morality griping about people I don't like. So I think that, first of all, I think that a lot of these people, when you say, do they think these benefit them, advancing this new philosophy, I think a lot of these people are going to be horrified in about 10 years by how much it does not benefit them. Specifically,
really?
I think a lot of these upper middle class white women, and I don't mean to single out that category, but are going to be shocked by the consequences of allowing urban, mostly but not entirely black crime, or mass Muslim and wherever else migration, including Eastern European white migration, by the way, or
Right.
any of this stuff. Unprovoked war as our military becomes more feminized. Any of the idiotic things that they're arguing for, those are going to have brutal consequences, perhaps particularly for women that can't fight. So I think there's going to be a backlash, and that backlash is probably going to make some new conservatives, and hopefully not too many people are badly hurt, let's say, as a result of that process. But I mean, in terms of why they're doing it, the reason is basically instrumental. So the narrative itself, I think, is sincerely believed. By this point, a whole lot of Americans don't know most of our history. So I think our history is actually fairly glorious. Like, if you just accept that conquest and warfare used to be generally accepted, and if you fought a reasonably honorable war with someone, you took their land. That was just the rule. You put that in the background. You accept that we should have given the natives more than we did, and we can resolve that in court now. You just take that as a given. But from that point forward, what we did with this continent, which was 85% unsettled, is pretty impressive. I mean, so there's that great story of the Irish and Italian railroad gang building the track across the continent, competing with the Chinese railroad gang. There's the Wright brothers in a bicycle shop building the first plane. I mean, I'm a black guy, so there are the black stories. There's Black Wall Street being built, and there's John Henry was a steel driving man, and there's all that stuff. There's New England, they were hunting whales. They had their songs. They were chasing them in these silly little wooden boats, singing and throwing spears. So there actually is that entire narrative that actually is American history. And there are the stories of the Indians, too, like chanting as they rode against the pony soldiers. Nobody knows that anymore. Most people's narrative of the United States, if they're on the left, comes down basically to civil rights in Vietnam. So when I poll students, and even when I've polled young teachers or surveyed, I guess would be a better way to put this, historical knowledge in my American Government 101 class, everyone knows who Martin Luther King is, everyone knows who Malcolm X is, everyone knows who Rosa Parks is, John F. Kennedy. Nobody knows who, like, Henry Ford is. So it's extremely easy, and even people that aren't that great, but that are just funny characters of history, no one knows who Ponzi is. Nobody knows who... Just you go through any of them. Mayor Daley in Chicago. Nobody knows who Carnegie was. So, as people who have that very limited base of knowledge act on what they think reality was, if you're ethical at all, there's going to be a sense of guilt, maybe a sense of shame, a desire to do something to compensate for that past. So, teaching this sort of broken history has an instrumental quality to it, I guess. So getting back to the point, what the 1619 Project is focused on is not so much the past, it's on shaping the future based on the past. So, i.e., if the way the traffic patterns in our cities work today is due to race war 200 years ago, walls were built by whites and to some extent blacks to keep the other group out or something, what do we have to do? Well, we have to redesign all of our cities with a focus on black neighborhoods. If our diet is heavily sugar-based because of slavery, the slaves grew sugar, tobacco, cotton, what do we have to do? Well, morally, perhaps we have to redesign the way we eat with a focus on a more European or West African style of eating. Now, all of this, of course, is just bullshit. I mean, most of the food we eat has been shaped by large European immigrant groups to this country. This has been documented dozens of times. But if you believe this, you have a justification for mass, non-incremental change to the country. I think that's why people are advocating this. And I don't think they understand that mass, non-incremental change to the country would be very bad for them.
Yeah, and you're right. I think, and it's fascinating because I brought this point up, but I didn't hear it contextualized the way you just did. Something I picked out was that students today have a very limited understanding of their direct history. Like, so I always use this example. If you talk about pop culture from the 80s and the 90s to a college student today, they have no clue what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Whereas when you and I were perhaps, and I'm older, so I'm assuming like when I was in high school, an equivalent period of time pop culturally may have even been like, say, the Honeymooners or something like that. And I could tell you about something that happened 50 years before I was born because I was steeped in that. We were, as students, steeped in that as we got older. Today's students are not. And it's almost counterintuitive given the access they have to that information, say on YouTube or on the internet, that you know, they're the concentric circles of their knowledge, whether it's history, politics, whatever, is getting closer and closer to their current day. So you're absolutely right. It does seem to be able to influence them to accept some of this nonsense because they have no other reference point. They're just like, this is what happened 10 years ago is my limit, you know, in terms of what happened. And I do find that concerning. Okay, I know we're a little short on time, so I want to move on a little bit. Critical race theory. Tell me a little bit about that, if you can, how your book addresses that, and what's up with that. Why should people be concerned about critical race theory?
Well, I think CRT, I'm not an expert on critical race theory and all of its actual academic incarnations, but I mean, I think CRT broadly defined is, so a simple way to put this that I think I coined actually at a small conference with Chris Rufo, but all of the critical theories, all of the left-wing academic theories are kind of lower IQ downstream variations on Marxism to me. So, like the Marxist idea, if you put aside the gobbledygook economic theory about how the widget maker doesn't get all his widgets and so on, is basically that society is a trick. And this is a very old left-wing idea. I mean, this goes back to Rousseau, where the social contract is perceived as a trick, like the man who fenced in the village and owns the property then comes up with property rights. And that assumes there's one man that fenced in the village and owns all the property. It's very much based on European nobility as versus American ideas or even Northern European ideas of yeomanry, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, so Marx takes this, he goes even further. And the idea is that what appear to be the facially neutral institutions of society are in fact designed to manipulate and oppress. Everything that you look at, like the system of law, is in fact designed to help the bourgeoisie hold down what would be the proletariat and the lumpen proletariat. So the law in its infinite majesty prohibits both the rich and the poor from sleeping under bridges and stealing bread, that kind of thing. And I mean, so everything else to a degree that was remarkable when I started reading and transcribing passages now that AI exists is just a direct ripoff of that. So in critical race theory, if you read like Delgado and Stefancic, the rich man has just been replaced with the white man. So their famous passage is like, racism is everywhere. I'm paraphrasing, but it's everywhere. It's structural. It's intentional. You're not imagining it. So like the framework of society, the SAT exam, the police stations, it's not designed to keep sex pests off the street and get the best kids into college. It's designed to help whiteness succeed. You know, fourth wave feminism, you take the rich man and replace him with the man. So the structure of society is designed to ensure men power through domestic slavery or something like that. I've heard feminists straight-facedly argue that the purpose of marriage is to give men access to unlimited sex whenever they want it. Now, again, none of this is real. Marriage is very trackably an institution that was developed by sort of, you know, the village council and the women's circle over thousands of years. I mean,
Right.
monogamy with another single armed person is not exactly the male fantasy. You know, that's just not real. But the idea has enough truth to it to be very, very powerful, very palatable. But queer theory is the same thing. Society is structured to benefit, you know, sexually normal, attractive people. And if you're outside that, you're the outcast. Fat studies, anyway, blah, blah, blah. My opinion on critical race theory, I guess, is just basically BS. Racism is one of many factor variables that impact your life, but society is not structured to oppress one race. If that were the case, you wouldn't see similar institutions across every society. But I mean, it's a very prevalent idea, and it allows you to critique every system. Why do they have police? Well, because they were the slave trading guards of the early American society, this kind of thing. And a surprising number of people take this dead seriously.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. Okay. One last question before we start to wrap up. And I have to do this because I have to needle my partner, William, who is a dyed-in-the-wool conservative. And being that you're a political science professor, this will make sense. In 2016, you criticized Donald Trump for allegedly dog whistling to the alt-right,
Yeah.
neo-Nazis, however you want to describe them, and describing his presidential campaign as shining a light, quote, shining a light on some dark crevices of the internet. Do you still stand by that assessment? And if so, has your opinion changed of Donald Trump and his campaign since then?
Yeah, I still stand by that. Like, I'm probably going to vote for Trump, but I mean, I think that it's really. So, I don't think the fact that there are probably proportionately, unless you count racism against whites, which I often do, but unless you do, I don't think it's much of a secret that there are more racist per cap in some zones of the right than in most zones of the left. I mean, like, if you were to look at who the guys on Stormfront are going to vote for, it'd be either Trump or nobody. Now, the flip side of that, of course, is that the people that are racist against whites are going to vote against Trump. And more importantly, the people that identify as literal communists are all going to vote against Trump. They're going to vote for the Dems or the Greens. So just saying something like, your man's the candidate of the racist doesn't mean anything. Like, well, your man's the candidate of the Che Guevara guys. We're literally throwing fire bombs at the NYPD. Like, what are you talking about? So, I mean, I don't view that as all that relevant. I'm not a racist or a communist. But I do think that one of the things that the Trump campaign early on, I think he's doing a better job of regulating this, and the Elon purchase of Twitter have done is make the point that there are a fair number of actual old school racist people still in the game. Now, a fair number probably means like 50,000 across the whole country. A lot of them are just witty and they've assembled a following. And that following, remember, is from all around the world. But I mean, like, there's a page on Twitter called Blacks Taking L's with the address of, I think it's literally just niggers taking L's, excuse the language. But I mean, it has 150,000 followers or something like that. It's ins taking L's. But I mean, you get a fair amount of that kind of thing. And I think that that's something that we've seen going back to like r/the Donald. Like, I wouldn't describe myself as an internet kid anymore. I'm about 40. But like, I mean, I know what 4chan is. I know what Reddit is. Like, I mean, I've seen a lot of this stuff. And I mean, I know what Lefty Pol is too. I've seen it from both sides, right? But a final note on this would be, like, Trump really does need to actually a serious take, as opposed to like me just griping about both sides are racist. Trump really does need to regulate this if he's going to make a pitch for, say, like, security moms who are white and middle class black or something like that. Like, there was a post from his campaign website and Twitter page the other day that was just, one side of it was your neighborhood under me, under Trump, and it was like a bunch of brick houses flying American flags. And the other side was your neighborhood under Harris. And it was a bunch of black people in like athletic clothing who are apparently supposed to be migrants. Like, one guy had a 40. There was one Spanish guy in the front to make it look more realistic, because like 79% of U.S. migrants are Latin. But you got the Spanish guy, and then you have like 50 black people. And the street is like littered with garbage and so on. And it was like, your area under Kamala Harris. And I mean, I posted this and was like, yo, is this just racist? And people are debating it right now. But I think that a lot of people, when they see that kind of thing, are going to say, okay, this is obviously meant to appeal to a certain kind of bigotry. And I mean, I often have that reaction myself. So yeah, I would discourage Trump from doing that.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. All right. Well, we've reached the part of the show, and thank you for all your conversation. Really enjoyed it. Wish we had some more time. But now we're at the part of the show that I like to call silly questions. These have no right or wrong answers. They're just some questions to let our viewers understand a little bit more about you. So number one, what's your favorite sport in which to participate? And then also, which sport do you enjoy watching on TV, if any?
Probably basketball for both. I also enjoy watching track. I ran in high school as well as doing some other things. But track is actually, no one wants to watch track in the USA, so it's never on TV unless it's some obscure meet in Italian. But so in practice, basketball. I like go down to the local gym and play pickup, and I also like the NBA, college ball, so on.
Bulls fan?
Yeah, fan of the Bulls. They've had a tough couple of years. I'm not really sure why they've been so bad the past couple of years. Their big three, the big Eastern European guy, Levine, and DeRozan are actually pretty good. They just don't have that many supporting pieces.
Yep, they need to coalesce a little bit more there.
Yeah.
Which U.S. president would you rank as being the best president, and which one would be the worst in your opinion?
I mean, Abe Lincoln's the best president. A bit dictatorial, but won the Civil War. I mean, it kept the country together. They're not even really debated. George Washington's number two. I mean, I think that Todd Jefferson, had his personal failings, but almost certainly number three. Bought Louisiana, which in practice meant a third of the country. So, I mean, I think the top rankings are pretty solidified. The worst U.S. president, probably Woodrow Wilson. I mean, when you look at just lifetime decisions combined with, like, he was an actual racist. I mean, big Birth of a Nation fan. That doesn't really take him down to the bottom zone. A lot of people are personal bigots, but just
Right.
like personal decisions, military strategy, he's right there. Who is the other one that's? No, I'll go with Wilson. One thing I will say there is that it's obviously not Trump or Obama or something like that. I mean, you could say those guys are in the bottom half, but they're
Right.
not losing international wars. They're not doing anything that would put you in those bottom five presidents.
Yeah. I would have bet money you might have said FDR as being one of the worst.
No, FDR did a lot of things that I really dislike. Now that's actually a contender. I'd probably put him. Most conservatives or libertarians would probably put him in the bottom five. But you also recognize the reasons that most Democrats would put him in the top five. I
Sure.
wouldn't. I wouldn't make him. I wouldn't claim he's the worst president.
Okay.
He's kind of. There is that sort of like Nietzsche's old line, "Beyond good and evil." There is that scenario where you have to recognize, like, no one would say that like Muhammad is an evil man. Like he founded our rival religion, Well, okay. He also took an entire people out of savagery. Like there really are people where you just have to say, okay, we're going to slap the great man label on him, Genghis Khan. You can't just say like he did a lot of bad things. Roosevelt, I mean, he delayed it 5 years longer than he had to, but kind of ended the Great Depression. It's a
Yeah.
complex question.
It's always one of those cases. I try not to judge people by contemporary standards on how they acted in their time. But the one thing about FDR is like, yeah, if you're a socialist, if you're someone who believes in collectivism, I mean, I don't appreciate it, but I don't hold it against him by calling him evil. I just don't like the whole internment camp. I think about, in terms of being an actual racist and denying Americans their liberties,
Yeah.
he'd be up there. But okay.
Well, the Japanese internment, that's interesting because that's an attack on FDR kind of from the left. I don't think that's defensible fully, but I mean, during a major war, I think that people treat that as a little more Nazi-ish than I view it as being. I mean, that's another one where we've looked at the lists of spies and we know there were plenty of Nazi and Japanese saboteurs. So I wouldn't
Well,
encourage.
why not a German or Italian internment camps?
Yeah, that's the response. But I mean, that would have caused a much because
Sure,
there were a
yes.
lot of Germans. I mean, that's the reason. There would have been a war if you tried to round up all the Germans.
Well, the Germans and the Italians were, I think, the first and second ethnic groups in this country at that time, right? So,
Yeah,
that
the Japanese were like 18th. I mean, so that's
Yeah.
why. That's the reason you couldn't go into Philadelphia and start like rounding people up with bayonets. I mean,
Right,
he did
right.
what he could. But I disapprove. But I don't think that's the sort of unprovoked act of evil people think it was. Like he just hated Japanese people. We were at war with Japan, and last thing, but like the redemption of Imperial Japan is something that I find extremely bizarre. Like where people say we should never have dropped those bombs, or like even with first generation Japanese migrants, the Nisei, there should not have been any limitation of say movement. Japan was allied with Hitler. Like they were the people that were conquering a third of the world. Like we were the good guys. So I mean, it is worth keeping that in mind.
Absolutely, absolutely. What would be the one artist or group you could listen to for the rest of your life if you had to choose one?
I mean, broad range, but like either Beethoven or Wu Tang Clan. I mean, it'd be someone with a large catalog. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. You've been wrongly convicted of a crime and sentenced to death. What's your last meal?
It's a tomahawk steak and a bunch of side dishes. I mean, but I really wouldn't be that concerned about what I was eating if I were in that situation.
But I'll accept tomahawk steak and lots of sides. Okay, and the last silly question. Have liberals ever gotten anything right?
Yeah, actually, I mean, you need both conservatives and liberals in society. I think a good way to think of this would be like mutation, where the majority of mutations are failures in the physical body that lead to illness or death, but 5% or so of them lead to better performance. Conservatives essentially are the immune system that smacks down bad ideas. We win wars, build roads. When you have a new movement, the idiotic extremes of punk, cutting, trans, all the things that have been knocked down over the years. I mean, even just stuff over the, like, ethical sluttiness isn't something I hear people talk about anymore because it got ridiculed so much. People will step forward and say, like, no, as a normal person, that's going to make me less likely to marry or hire you, so maybe you shouldn't do it. And it stops. That's the conservative role. The liberal role is to continue to advance new, interesting ideas. And a lot of those new, interesting ideas, like maybe we should let women vote, survived. So, yes, you do. Right. Now, I mean, I see people making fun of it, like a little eyebrow raise there. But obviously, it is good to use 100% of the human capital in your society. Right. So, yes, we do need liberals as well as conservatives.
Yeah, liberals are the gas pedal and conservatives are the brakes, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely right, yeah.
Yeah. All right, Dr. Wilfred Reilly, thank you so much for joining us today on The Big Questions. Everyone, go check out his book, Lies My Liberal Teacher Told Me, available on Amazon. Wilfred, if people want to follow your work, if they want to follow you on Twitter, what's your information?
I mean, the best way to find me is just to Google me. I'm Wilfred Reilly. It's WILFREDREILLY. Yeah, and you'll find my Twitter account, my Facebook page, if you're into that kind of thing, my little website, all that sort of stuff. And I'm at a point where I'll still definitely reach out and talk to you. So look forward to that happening.